For this video, I am going to teach you how to make thickened water with some starch that you have on hand. So for this video, I'm going to use white rice flour. You may also use cornstarch or arrowroot starch or potato starch. It's up to you. So I start with 2 tablespoons of the white rice flour, and I'm going to add some water into that to make what we call a slurry. It's really important that your water is cool, not hot, because if it's hot, it will make clumps, and then you will have clumpy water, which we do not tolerate when someone has dysphagia. So I add 2 cups of water to my pan, and then I add the water to my starch, which in this case, like I said, is rice flour. And I'm just gonna mix that until it's well incorporated, and then I'm gonna pour it into our pot that has our water in it. So I had to pour some of the water back into the dish to get the starch out. You don't have to do this. I just don't like to waste anything if at all possible. So you can always add some additional starch just straight into your pan as long as you're using cold water to start. I also have a lime handy because not everyone appreciates the flavor of rice, and this is going to taste like rice. So I just cut up a lime and I squeeze the lime into the water. You can always flavor your water afterwards as well. You don't have to flavor it before. So I squeeze the lime, and then I'm going to turn on the burner, and we're just gonna bring this up to temperature. One of the things to remember is that you want to stir. I use a whisk because that is the tool that I prefer. You can use just a wooden spoon or a metal spoon if you prefer. You just want to be careful that you're getting out all of the lumps. This takes several minutes. Different types of starches take a different amount of heat to thicken. So the difference would be like a potato, which grows in the ground, we call it a root starch. It thickens at a lower temperature than a cereal starch, and cereal starches are rice, wheat, etc. So I'm just gonna stir this consistently until it starts to thicken, and you can always add more starch to this if it's not thick enough for you. If you get it too thick, then we'll just add a little more liquid at the end. So the reason I'm stirring consistently is because starch does burn if it gets too hot and stays in one place. And because starch is heavier than the water, it will sink to the bottom. And if it thickens in a clump in the bottom, it will burn. So we want to keep stirring. And I use a thermometer to measure the temperature. This is not necessary. You do not need a thermometer. I just like to know kind of where my temperature is at, so I know how much farther I have to go. This process does take about 10 minutes, so it's important to be patient. I'm adding a little bit more starch because I felt like I did not add enough originally to get it as thick as I want it to be. Remember, we can always thin this out with some water or juice or even some milk at the end. Starting to bubble around the edges, that is a good sign that the temperature is hot enough that it is really starting to thicken. And as it starts to thicken, I stir continuously to make sure that it is not burning. And you can see as I dip my spoon in here that it is clinging to the spoon, which tells us that it is thick. It's much thicker than the water that we started with. This process of cooking should break down the starch enough as well that it should not cause digestive issues, but it really depends on the person and how sensitive they are to the type of starch and the amount of doneness that it needs to be cooked to for them. So by the time this reaches, I think it's about 200 degrees for where it needs to thicken, it should be fully cooked. It will taste like rice, but it should have cooked all the rice all the way through. So I turn the heat down and turn it off, and we have a very nice thick, and I did have some of the extra starch left over that I can always use for the next batch if I put it in the fridge. All right, so now we need to put our liquid into a vessel and cool it. So if you're making tea and you want to thicken some tea, you could use this hot to thicken your tea. But because I had planned just to do this for just some water or some juice, I'm going to put it in a container and we are going to put it in the fridge and let it cool all the way. I do add a little more juice because I want it to taste citrusy. I like that lime flavor. So after this cools, we can add it to whatever liquid that we want to serve, and we just add a little bit more in until we get to the desired thickness. All right, to close out this video on thickening liquids with your own starches, we have different options. For this video, I used white rice flour to thicken my water. You could use cornstarch. You could use arrowroot starch. You could use regular old flour, which is really, really not great unless you cook it a long time. And if you cook it more, it thickens less well. You could also use potato starch or other starch, whatever you have handy. So with our thickened water that we made with our rice flour, I cooled it in a jar in the fridge, and I added some orange juice to it and made just a thickened orange juice. You can use any liquid that you want. You can make tea, you can do coffee, you can do juice of any kind. You can do milk, you can do a protein shake like Ensure or Boost. And it's really important just to make sure that when you're mixing it in after it's cooled for your cooled liquids, that you are mixing it really well. If you need to strain it, if you have any lumps, get yourself a little strainer and strain it out. So if you have any questions, please send us a message, dysphagiaduo@gmail.com, dysphagiaduo@gmail.com. You can also send us a text, 574-475-7285. Let us know if you have any questions.